Hi guys, today we are going to find out what if Putin had never been born. You're standing in Red Square in 1999, watching history pivot on an invisible hinge. The cobblestones beneath your feet have witnessed centuries of Russian power struggles. But tonight feels different. Snow falls gently on the Kremlin walls as Boris Yeltsin prepares his New Year's Eve resignation speech. In our timeline, he's about to hand power to Vladimir Putin. But in this reality, that name means nothing. You probably won't survive the political chaos that's about to unfold without Putin's iron grip to contain it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with your location and local time. I'm curious where in the world you're watching from. Now, sit back and let's dive into today's alternate journey together. You watch as Yeltsin's trembling hands hold a different speech, one that will announce his chosen successor. Instead of the unknown FSB director from St. Petersburg, he names someone else entirely. The oligarchs in their luxury apartments hold their breath, knowing their comfortable arrangements are about to shatter. Without Putin's calculated rise through the security apparatus, Russia's power vacuum yawns wider than the Siberian tundra. You watch as Boris Yeltsin's presidency stretches into uncharted territory, his health flickering like a dying light bulb. Without Putin waiting in the wings, the succession crisis deepens with each passing month. Yeltsin's family and inner circle scramble to find an acceptable heir who won't prosecute them for corruption. You observe the power brokers meeting in smoky back rooms, desperately seeking someone controllable yet credible. The oligarchs grow bolder, sensing that no strongman will emerge to clip their wings. Boris Berezovsky and Vladimir Gusinsky expand their media empires, turning television into weapons of influence. You witness Anatoly Chubais maneuvering for position, his reformist credentials making him a potential candidate. Meanwhile, the Communist Party under Gennady Zhuganov smells opportunity in the chaos. Regional governors begin acting like feudal lords, knowing Moscow's grip is weakening. You feel the country pulling apart at its seams as centrifugal forces gain momentum. The Duma becomes a battlefield where deputies literally throw punches over procedure. Yeltsin's approval ratings plummet below single digits, yet he clings to power. You realize that without Putin's calculated entrance, Russian politics has become a free-for-all. The economy continues its downward spiral as investors flee the uncertainty. You witness the oligarchs unleash their full potential without Putin's future dominance to restrain them. Boris Berezovsky transforms into Russia's shadow president, his media empire shaping public opinion daily. Vladimir Gusinsky's NTV becomes a propaganda weapon, attacking rivals while protecting allies. You watch Roman Abramovich quietly accumulating assets, knowing no strongman will force him to sell. The aluminum wars between Oleg Deripaska and other magnates escalate into open corporate violence. Mikhail Khodorkovsky expands Yukos aggressively, dreaming of political power to match his wealth. You observe these titans carving up Russia like medieval warlords dividing conquered territory. Regional governors align themselves with different oligarchs, creating competing power networks. The military-industrial complex fragments as various businessmen buy influence within defense ministries. You feel the state dissolving into a collection of private fiefdoms. Banking becomes a battlefield where hostile takeovers resemble military campaigns. Energy resources flow according to oligarch loyalties rather than national interests. You witness contract killings spike as business disputes turn lethal without state mediation. The FSB splits into competing factions, each serving different oligarch masters. Moscow's streets buzz with rumors of which magnate will emerge supreme. You realize that without Putin's centralizing force, capitalism has devoured the Russian state. You find yourself in the North Caucasus as the First Chechen War drags on without Putin's strategic mind. The conflict becomes a grinding stalemate that bleeds Russia's military and treasury dry. Without Putin's calculated use of apartment bombings to justify intervention, public support wavers. You watch as Shamil Basayev's raids into Dagestan meet a confused and divided Russian response. The oligarchs view Chechnya as either a business opportunity or an expensive distraction. Some fund private military companies while others lobby for negotiated withdrawal. You observe General Alexander Leibid's influence growing as he advocates for pragmatic solutions. The military brass fragments into competing factions, each proposing different strategies. International mediators flood into the region, sensing Russia's weakened position. You witness Aslan Maskhadov struggling to control radical elements without Moscow's iron pressure. The conflict spreads to neighboring republics as instability becomes contagious. Young Russian conscripts die in a war their government can't clearly justify or decisively win. You feel the Caucasus slipping from Moscow's control as local strongmen fill the power vacuum. The war becomes a symbol of Russia's post-Soviet decline rather than renewed strength. European governments grow bolder in criticizing Russian military tactics without fearing Putin's retaliation. You realize that without Putin's ruthless clarity, Russia fights like a confused giant. You witness Russian media experiencing its golden age as independent journalism flourishes without Putin's censorship. NTV's investigative teams expose corruption scandals that would have been buried in our timeline. You watch Anna Politkovskaya reporting fearlessly from Chechnya, her voice amplifying civilian suffering. Echo of Moscow Radio becomes a platform for genuine political debate rather than controlled opposition. Dmitry Kiselev remains just another TV presenter instead of becoming propaganda's chief architect. You observe RT never evolving into a global disinformation network targeting Western democracies. Independent newspapers like Novaya Gazeta investigate oligarch crimes without facing systematic persecution. Regional media outlets report local corruption without fearing sudden extremism charges. You feel the electricity of a truly free press holding power accountable. Opposition politicians appear regularly on television, presenting alternative visions for Russia's future. Investigative documentaries expose the apartment bombings as potential false flag operations. You watch journalists traveling freely, interviewing dissidents without orchestrated harassment campaigns. Internet freedom remains largely unrestricted as the state lacks Putin's digital control obsession. Social media platforms develop naturally without facing coordinated government manipulation efforts. You realize that without Putin's authoritarian instincts, Russia might have developed media pluralism. Foreign correspondents report from Russia without facing expulsion or intimidation tactics. You observe Russia's energy diplomacy evolving along completely different strategic lines without Putin's weaponization tactics. Gazprom remains primarily a commercial enterprise rather than becoming a geopolitical weapon. You watch European nations building pipelines based on economic logic instead of navigating political coercion. The South Stream and Nord Stream projects develop as purely business ventures. Ukrainian gas transit continues smoothly without becoming leverage for territorial ambitions. You witness Russia joining international energy frameworks as a cooperative partner. Oil revenues flow toward domestic development rather than funding foreign military adventures. Energy executives focus on efficiency and profit instead of serving Kremlin foreign policy. You observe Western companies investing freely in Russian energy without fearing sudden nationalization. The oligarchs controlling energy assets operate by market rules rather than political directives. International energy prices remain stable without artificial Russian supply manipulations. You watch climate change negotiations including Russia as a constructive participant. Arctic oil exploration proceeds through international cooperation rather than aggressive territorial claims. Energy infrastructure becomes a bridge connecting Russia to Europe instead of a weapon dividing them. You feel the absence of energy blackmail that characterized Putin's foreign policy toolkit. Russian energy workers enjoy better conditions as companies compete for talent, rather than serving state power. You witness Ukrainian-Russian relations developing along a completely different trajectory without Putin's imperial obsessions. The Orange Revolution proceeds without Russian interference, allowing genuine democratic development in Ukraine. You observe Viktor Yushchenko's presidency flourishing without systematic poisoning attempts or political sabotage. Cultural ties between the nations strengthen as political tensions remain manageable business disputes. The Russian Orthodox Church maintains normal relations with Ukrainian religious institutions without weaponizing faith. You watch Ukrainian oligarchs cooperating with Russian counterparts in legitimate business ventures. Energy disputes get resolved through international arbitration rather than pipeline shutoffs. Crimea remains Ukrainian territory as no strategic mastermind plots its annexation. You feel the absence of little green men and hybrid warfare tactics. Ukrainian language and culture develop naturally without facing systematic Russian cultural imperialism. The Euromaidan protests never occur because EU integration proceeds gradually without Russian ultimatums. You observe millions of Ukrainian lives remaining intact without war displacement. Eastern Ukraine continues its industrial development instead of becoming a frozen conflict zone. The Budapest Memorandum retains meaning as Russia honors Ukrainian territorial integrity. You witness two nations that could have been natural partners developing mutual prosperity. NATO expansion toward Ukraine remains a distant theoretical discussion rather than an existential Russian crisis. You watch NATO expansion proceeding eastward without the fierce Russian resistance that Putin would have orchestrated. Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic join the alliance smoothly as Russia focuses inward on domestic challenges. The Baltic states enter NATO with minimal Russian protest beyond diplomatic complaints. You observe Russian military doctrine remaining defensive rather than developing hybrid warfare capabilities. Partnership for peace programs include Russia as a cooperative participant rather than a strategic competitor. The Munich Security Conference becomes a forum for genuine dialogue instead of Putin's famous confrontational speech. You witness European security architecture evolving inclusively rather than creating opposing blocs. Russian generals attend NATO exercises as observers and occasional participants. The Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty remains intact without Russian violations. You feel the absence of new nuclear weapons development designed to counter Western expansion. Georgia's 2008 conflict either never occurs or resolves through diplomatic mediation. Military spending in Eastern Europe remains moderate without the Russian threat perception. You observe arms control negotiations continuing productively rather than collapsing into mutual accusations. The concept of strategic parity evolves toward cooperation rather than competition. European missile defense systems develop without triggering Russian countermeasures. You realize that without Putin's zero-sum worldview, European security could have been genuinely collective. You witness Russia standing at democracy's crossroads, its institutions fragile but still breathing without Putin's authoritarian consolidation. The Duma retains genuine legislative power as competing oligarchs prevent any single faction from dominating. You observe regional governors maintaining real autonomy, creating a federal system closer to its constitutional design. Civil society organizations flourish as NGOs operate without facing foreign agent designations. The judiciary struggles with corruption but avoids becoming a purely political weapon. You watch opposition parties competing in elections that remain genuinely contested despite irregularities. Local democracy experiments emerge in various regions as mayors gain real decision-making authority. University campuses buzz with political debate instead of enforced conformity. You feel the tentative emergence of a middle class demanding accountability from their leaders. Trade unions organize independently without state co-optation or systematic suppression. Constitutional amendments proceed through proper procedures rather than orchestrated referendums. You observe the Federation Council representing regional interests instead of rubber-stamping Kremlin decisions. Anti-corruption investigations target all political factions rather than serving as selective justice. Press freedom rankings show Russia improving gradually rather than plummeting toward authoritarian depths. You realize that without Putin's systematic destruction, Russian democracy might have survived its birth pangs. The ghost of what could have been haunts every genuine election and independent court decision. You step back to survey the global ripple effects spreading from Putin's absence across the world stage. Syria's civil war unfolds without Russian military intervention, leaving Assad's fate to domestic forces. You watch the Middle East reshaping itself without Putin's calculated support for authoritarian regimes. Cyber warfare remains primitive without Russia's systematic development of digital attack capabilities. Election interference stays limited to domestic actors rather than becoming a Russian export industry. You observe social media platforms developing naturally without coordinated disinformation campaigns. The Brexit referendum proceeds without Russian psychological operations amplifying division. American politics evolves without the shadow of Russian electoral manipulation. You feel the absence of Novichok attacks on foreign soil and diplomatic expulsions. International law retains more credibility without systematic Russian violations and legal nihilism. The United Nations functions marginally better without Putin's strategic use of vetoes. You witness climate negotiations proceeding without Russian fossil fuel obstructionism. Arctic cooperation develops peacefully rather than becoming a new theater for geopolitical competition. Nuclear proliferation remains more contained without Russian weapons technology transfers. You observe a world where hybrid warfare never becomes the new normal. Global democracy faces fewer external pressures, allowing natural political evolution. The concept of sovereignty retains meaning without systematic territorial violations. You realize that one man's absence has prevented countless conflicts and preserved millions of lives. As you return to our timeline, the weight of this alternate reality settles heavily. You've witnessed a Russia that could have stumbled toward democracy despite its oligarchic chaos. The world you've explored breathes easier without Putin's calculated destabilization efforts. Nations develop their own paths without fearing sudden Russian intervention or manipulation. Yet this alternate Russia faces its own demons: corruption, organized crime, and institutional weakness. You realize that Putin's absence doesn't automatically create paradise, but it removes a uniquely destructive force. The oligarchs still fight, but their battles don't reshape global politics. Russian citizens live with uncertainty, but also with hope that genuine change remains possible. You've seen how one individual's presence or absence can alter the trajectory of human civilization. This alternate timeline reminds us that history isn't inevitable. It's shaped by choices and circumstances. The Russia without Putin shows us both the paths not taken and the fragility of democratic development. Perhaps most haunting is realizing how different our world might have been with just one less person born. What other pivotal figures in history could we imagine away? And how might that reshape everything we think we know about cause and effect in human affairs?